All right. Welcome, Vince. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me. Great to see you.
Absolutely. Same here. Where are you located, Vince?
Our headquarters is in Glastonbury, Connecticut, which is just outside of Hartford, Connecticut. But today you catch me on the shores of Rhode Island. If there's any Swifties out there, where we are is about a 5-minute car ride or 15-minute bike ride from her house up on the Atlantic. So very popular
Wow.
spot. Mind you,
Wow.
she's a little different price category than where I'm staying right now, but
Got it. How's the weather out there?
it's beautiful. We have a heat wave in New England. It's been over 90 last few days. It's high 70s, low 80s here on the shore. So we had a nasty spring. So it's good to have some nice weather.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait. See, I'm originally from Barbados, so we're used to like the 90 plus, but there's
Yep.
no humidity. So it's
Mm.
just dry heat. So it's way more bearable than all of this nasty humidity that's in our weather here. So
Uh,
praying for some, more bearable, temperatures. So, Vince, I'm super excited today for two reasons. One, you are actually a part of the rebrand for EdUp Career Schools, The Scoop, which is now EdUp Edge, the
okay.
scoop on career schools, leadership, and life hacks. So
Yep.
I'm really excited about that. And the second thing is, I get the opportunity to talk about one of my favorite subjects, which is leadership, especially when it comes to admissions. I think so many leaders are getting it wrong with
Mhm.
who are the best types of enrollment leaders, and most importantly, who fits the role of an advisor, which we're going to get into a little
Sure.
later. Okay, so for those of you who do not know, this is Vincent Scaramuzzo. He's actually the president of Ed-Exec Inc., and that is the leading education executive search firm. And he's also a contributing author to various education publications. So, Vince, talk about how did you even get to recruiting, especially when it comes to a beast like higher education?
Yeah. A dumb luck.
Really?
I, I got really fortunate and lucky. So I spent from my first job at age 14, I was a busboy at a local seafood restaurant. And my last job, I was 28 years old running a 3-star New York Times reviewed kind of high-end restaurant in my local town. And I had just got burnt out. If you could do that at 28,
Wow.
it wasn't the long hours. I say was the wrong hours, right?
Mm.
Um, and I had just met who was going to be my wife at the time, and she was living in Connecticut, and said, "Why don't you come up here with me for a while?" I was born and raised in New York, so I said, "Yep, I'll come on up there." And after a few months, she said, "Are you going to get another job or what?" And a friend of mine at the time had just started working for an MRI franchise. MRI Management Recruiters International is like one of the largest franchisees of executive search firms in the world. And he said, "Yeah, they're hiring. You should try it out." And I did, and they were just starting an education division. So came in there not really knowing much about education or admissions advisors or directors of admissions.
Uh-huh.
But that was my first search, a director of admissions somewhere down in, I think it was Sarasota, Florida. So such began my journey of learning all about, these positions and educators. And it truly is education, right? Because everybody I spoke to was so happy to share about what they did. So
Hmm.
if you asked great questions, they were the best educators. And 4 years later, I had an opportunity to buy out my part of the business and start Ed-Exec. And I did that in 2008.
Wow.
And this year is my 20th year of recruiting and talking to folks around the country. So that's the fast forward version of, yeah,
Congratulations. Mhm.
of how I got into this.
Wow. Are there any hobbies that you've had in the past that kind of tie in into what you do now?
Um, I don't necessarily think hobbies, but a lot of the things I was interested in, I think
Hmm.
played well. So I was always naturally very curious. Like if something worked or didn't work, I wanted to know why. It wasn't enough like, oh, the lights come on, like that's good enough. Like I always wanted to know why. So I think good recruiters have to be naturally curious to ask
Yeah.
questions about people's jobs and their lives and their careers. That helped a lot. And I was always very tech savvy. I was in on computers from day one. I was on the internet from day one. And that plays such a large role now in recruiting. So I think those natural tendencies helped me a lot.
Wow, that's interesting because when I graduated high school, I thought I was going to be like this. I was always into like beauty and doing hair.
Mhm.
And I always thought I was going to open up this turnkey beauty salon, and that was going to be my career. And then I have multiple beauty salons around the world. And I also played musical instruments. So I thought I was going to go traveling. I had the opportunity to travel to a couple places. But after I graduated college, here I am almost 18 years in higher education, which is totally left of going the beauty direction. So let me ask you this, because when it comes to recruiting, I know it's not always easy. And I'm not sure how it works, but when you're recruiting for a school, is there a list of, let's say, characteristics that campus presidents would ask you for when it comes to enrollment leaders? They would say, Vince, this is exactly what I want them to have. This is who I want them to be. Is that how it's lined up? And do you always agree?
Yeah, they're pretty specific. They're pretty specific on what they want, who they want, not only from a credential perspective, but from a culture perspective of what their expectations are of them. What kind of, if I'm asking good questions, what kind of work environment are they going to be on, and what kind of leader are they going to be working for? I don't always agree with it. If it's not what I call fillable, in other words, if their expectations is not in alignment with the marketplace and what individuals want, and where they want to go work for, well, then we might not take the search, right? Because it's just not fillable. But if it is fillable, it's not really, we're kind of like the bartender. Like, we don't have to like the drink, but you have to mix it really well and serve them exactly what they asked for, right? So it's our job to understand what it is they want and then go find it, assuming it exists. But I do think a lot of recruiters make the mistake of listening to a wish list that doesn't exist and then promising them they're going to go find those folks when they're just not out there, or people just don't want to work in that type of environment. So yeah, we just have to listen. Unfortunately, we don't get to make suggestions and recommendations, but at the end of the day, it's their schools and they get to make the decisions. They write the checks.
I get it. But have you ever gone back and forth with a couple of schools? Like, they're asking for a certain type of DOA and you're saying to them, listen, those type of DOAs have never survived in this industry. Have you ever had any of those situations happen?
They sometimes ask for positions that don't really exist. So I hear a lot of, I want a director of admissions, but I don't need someone who's been a director of admissions. Get me like their number 2. And I'm like, well, who's that? Well, there's probably like an assistant director. And I'm like, the overwhelming majority of these schools don't have an assistant director. They have a field of reps, and then they have a director of admissions. They might have a senior rep, who's been there the longest. And I don't know if that person's ready to take the next step or not. But there's really not an assistant director. Or, some of the bigger systems might have that title, right? Or bigger campus. But the overwhelming majority of career schools don't. They're just not large enough.
Exactly. Can we get into some of those characteristics of, enrollment leaders? Because you mentioned something when it comes to senior rep or ADOA. I have never believed that glorified admissions advisors, that's what we used to call them back in the day, should be enrollment leaders. Just because you are leading the pack when it comes to, let's say, starts, right? A lot of leaders make the mistake of promoting that person into leadership just because they're a high performer.
Yeah.
So what do you think is some of the characteristics? Do you agree or disagree with that?
I think it can go either way, right? So your best enroller is not always going to be your best manager.
Exactly.
In executive recruitment, a lot of the parallels in terms of, like, I can tell you conversion numbers for an executive recruiter that would kind of match a director of admissions, right? Or an admissions representative or senior rep. There's a lot of similar parallels. The best recruiter at my firm might not be great at leading a team or a desk, right? They're just great individual contributors. And there's nothing wrong with that. And you should support them and give them every tool possible and pay them good money for being so great at what they do. I think that's a challenge for leadership, is identifying who's the great individual contributor and who's the person who's always looking for more, right? They take on extra responsibility. They mentor new people when they come in without being asked. It just kind of like comes natural to them. I think that's the person who's not a glorified rep, right? That's the person you tap for promotion, versus the person who just has, great activity and great numbers all the time, but don't show any of those other leadership qualities. So I think that's a challenge a lot of schools have, is identifying who they have underneath them and and not making the mistake, because, promoting your best rep who maybe doesn't love leading people could be the worst decision you make, because you just chase that producer right out the door. You make a work environment they're not going to be comfortable in, and now you have to either fire them or demote them. Either one isn't good.
And it gets messy.
Yeah.
It gets really messy. What about conversation starters? Because what I've noticed is that you have so many enrollment leaders who they're really good at their role as far as the numbers and how to get a team to perform. But at the same time, the personal part is missing. And I know back in the day, there was always this gray area of how personal should you get when it comes to work. I believe that, number one, empathy is very important, right? But then also, if you can simply start a conversation with your team members, if you know they have kids or they have family or something happened over the weekend, hey, so how did that game go? But I find that there's a lot of leaders who know absolutely nothing about their team members, so they can't start anything.
Oh yeah, I had a university client once that had career-focused programs, and one of the questions they used to ask potential director of admissions candidates. Now, these were pretty big schools, 800 to 1,200 students per location, sizable teams. So there was a pretty serious director of admissions role. And they would ask them, best rep, I don't need their name, just tell me about your best rep. Tell me about something about them, not work related. And then they would ask the question, tell me about your worst one. Tell me about you're struggling. Worst isn't really the right word, but tell me about your rep that's struggling, or your counselor who's struggling. Tell me something about them, anything, are they the son who plays guitar, or whatever it might be. And they use that as a judge of, if that leader couldn't really tell you one thing personal about them, then they felt like maybe the connection with their team wasn't there. And again, there's, especially in this very compliant HR white gloved world we're in now, you don't want to cross lines, but you should have a relationship with your employees, people who work for you, where something about them. I mean, if you're in the school with them every day, something has to come up at some point, right?
Exactly. Well, what about transparency? So when I say that, I find that there are so many enrollment leaders, and not even only in higher education, but generally in business. When something happens, like you just came out of a terrible meeting and your team was present, right? Your team, they already know that you're human, that you have feelings. But I feel like a lot of leaders have a tendency to kind of glaze over that and make it seem as if nothing ever affects them at all. And I feel like it's a turnoff for their teams, because they're sitting there saying, hold on, I was in that meeting too. You can't tell me you're coming out of there all bubbly like nothing happened. How do you feel about that?
I can only speak on that, I guess, to personal experiences, with my teams. We've been on calls, video calls or conference calls with potential clients. And like you said, it's just a nightmare. It doesn't go well. Maybe I'm not on my game that day. Maybe they weren't on their game, whatever it might be. And especially if it's me, I want to get back with everybody right away and go, wow, what a nightmare that was, right? And then let's triage. Okay, they asked this, I wish I had answered that, or I wasn't prepared for XYZ, or whatever it might be, or I wasn't expecting them to go in that direction. And boy, I just missed that one entirely. But hey, what can you do? Let's learn from it, and we'll be ready for next time. I mean, that's how I would handle it. I think that's the best way. Get the elephant in the room present and on the table, and let's just do it better next time. I don't think you can gloss over stuff. I do think you can gloss over a little bit if someone working under you has just really fallen flat on their face. Like, we don't need to rub salt in the wound when it's really fresh. Maybe we give it a pass, be a little nonchalant about it, and then circle back at a later time where, things have cooled off a little bit and we can make it a learning experience without having to embarrass somebody.
Absolutely. And I think it's less embarrassing too. Like, imagine coming out of a meeting that was terrible and your entire team just watched you get floored and slaughtered and reamed into. And now you come out the meeting, you go back into your office and you're trying to keep the smile on your face. And then you have your team members like creeping past. And every time they move past you, you have to try to, act as if everything is good. After a while, that gets embarrassing, as opposed to saying, I just heard me get reamed into, okay? Screwed up. All right. Now I need you guys to help me find some solutions on how we're going to get ourselves out that hole. I think you rip the Band-Aid off And now
Sure.
everybody's comfortable and they also see
Oh
you as
yeah.
a person,
Yep.
you know? I
Yep.
love it. I was talking to a campus president a couple of months ago, and he was looking for an enrollment leader. And he said there's no way that I want anyone who's in higher education. I'm
Mm-hmm.
looking for someone who probably did car sales, and I want them to come in and oversee the team. And I was going back and forth with him because I'm like, it's kind of different when you're a sales leader outside of higher education.
Mm-hmm.
You have the compliance, you have the starts. I think it's different to bring a salesperson from inside to lead a team who knows
Yep.
absolutely nothing about higher ed. How do you feel about that?
I think at the leadership level, that
Yeah.
would be challenging. I
Mm-hmm.
think at the admissions representative or admissions counselor level, very doable. And I've had clients who have been very specific for both. You know, I've had clients
Mm-hmm.
who said, "Hey, we don't hire anybody with education experience because we don't want to retrain them. Like we don't want to try to get the best of them and then put our good practices into them. It's just, you know, what do they say? Don't try to teach an old dog new tricks."
Mm-hmm.
Type deal. You know. So they want to hire them brand new. Other schools say, hey, we need someone who's experienced, who can hit the ground running. You know, we don't have time for a lot of, you know, train up here. So I think at the lower levels that works for an
Mm-hmm.
admissions leader in this highly, you know, regulatory environment we're in. That sounds pretty dangerous to me to just bring in a sales leader like that.
That's exactly what I thought. Well, you know what? Let's get into admissions advisors because I've had so many people reaching out who are looking to get into this role.
Mm-hmm.
And first off, I don't think that the advisors back in our days are the same ones that are so circling around today. First off, do you feel as if there's been a shift in the type of advisors who are being hired today?
Good question. Back in the day, we're that old already, right? That they
I
don't
know,
build them the same anymore. When I was starting up, they used to, you know, I tell that to my recruiters. I go, there was no LinkedIn. We made a list the night before over a beer, and you made 120 phone calls the next day and hoped someone answered. And they actually,
Yeah,
there was no text message. They actually called back, you know.
there you go.
People used to call back on voicemail. Good question. I mean, I think a lot of the traits are still the same.
Mm-hmm.
I do think there are fewer folks with those traits. I don't know if that's like a sign of the times, or maybe those folks who have the traits just go naturally in another direction now. I'm not really sure, but I think you know, the same things still exist. Like it has to be a tenacity. You know, they have to not easily be discouraged or give up, right? And I think, you know, probably the biggest change is the tech savvy. Like you just have to be so tech savvy. You just can't pick up a phone and hammer phone calls all day long. You know, the recruiting approach, and I would say the same with the admissions approach, you'd probably give somebody 15 years ago, while the consultative sale part of it or consultative conversation or the same. All the technology surrounding it to enable you and help you has changed dramatically. So you do need to be up to date. I do think today's employee is, you know, pretty tech savvy for the most part.
Mm-hmm. I think the advisors today are soft. I think they're really soft, but can I really blame them? Not really, because I don't think that all the facts are being given up front.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when it comes to, let's say, a leader or campus president who's actually doing the hiring for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why I say that is because I talked to so many. I had a person 2 weeks ago literally tell me, hold on for a second. I thought that I was just going to call a bunch of students and talk to them and get them enrolled. And I'm like, that's what you thought the advisor role was. You are so far off from the truth, but these things weren't told up front in the interview. So now it looks like it's a revolving door, and it may appear that they're really soft, but really and truly, if we would have told them everything up front, would they have even taken the job? Probably not.
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, listen, this is arguably a softer generation coming up. I mean, we just, you know, we were Generation X was these, you know, kids just left on their own to ride their bicycles all day long and figure it out until the end of the day. I do think they had a little stronger work ethic, or so it seems. So like you said, but then that pivots to leadership. There is a shared responsibility, right? So setting expectations, clear communications, it will eliminate some of it. It's just still not going to eliminate all of it. I mean, I've run into it, in hiring here, what we used to look for, and still do look for. You set the expectations, but until they actually get in the seat and are live in front of that computer and that phone and have to start having conversations, no matter how much you articulate it, even if you have them. I've had people sit in on calls to hear what it sounds like. I've had people like practice making calls for a half a day to see, can they pick up the phone? It's just not good indicators until they get into the seat. But I don't think it's fair to dump it all on this newer generation. I do think leadership has to take some responsibility and have to figure out a way to manage them, because if you don't, you're going to be short-staffed all the time.
Yeah. So higher education, I know they don't like to use terms like customer service because they don't believe that our students are consumers, which they are, right? So especially when it comes to career education, it's sales, right? Do you normally tell people in the interviews that, admissions is a sales role? Do you suggest that?
No, only because we're not doing, entry level stuff. If we get hired, even at the entry level of an admissions representative or counselor as a search firm, they come to us when they have a very specific need that's not getting filled through general postings, or sometimes they just need to do a lot of hiring, right? They just need to hire, I've had OPMs, they need to hire 25 new admissions counselors because they've taken on 3 new clients and they're not staffed. So we're not hiring them kind of green coming in with no expectation. Yeah. Most schools can do that, on their own. They might not need a recruiter to do that. But yeah, I would recommend to them that they are, informing them about what they're getting into. Yeah, sales is a dirty word in education.
It sure is.
Yeah, I think there's better words for it, right? I mean, from the minute you have contact with that student, that's the student experience, right? So it doesn't have to be customer service. You can come up with other names for this consultative and enrollment process that happens. But there is a sales aspect to it in terms of, let's just say the numbers and the effort of how many dials you have to make has a sales feature to it at the very least.
I like the term that you used, sales feature, as opposed to sales, because a lot of times when people think of sales, they think of, old school car salesmen, right? And customer service being non-existent, so now that relates to what's going on the phones with a lot of advisors. They're thinking sales. I need to make numbers. I need to make expectations, or I possibly may not have a job anymore. So it now becomes this numbers game, and the communication and rapport building is totally out the window. So I like the sales aspect into it, because when it comes to conversions and meeting expectations, that's where a lot of advisors go left, because they're like, wait a minute, I didn't know that. Oh, I have numbers I have to meet. There's a class start.
One of the great things I've heard is just drop wherever you see the word sales, put an activity, right? So we need daily activity, right? And some of the best schools I work with focus on daily activity, not weekly or monthly results. So if you have reasonable daily activity goals and you reach those activity goals, well, as a great director of admissions, and by the way, this, pull back the curtain for headhunters or executive recruiters, it's identical behind the scenes. If you know what your daily activity is, and you as a leader know what your conversion numbers are behind the scenes, well, then what the end result will be in a month. You're not helping that rep or counselor by giving them that versus chasing the daily activity. So the sanity is in your daily activity, right? If we send 5 people on an interview with a potential client for a job, well, we know that usually about 4.5 will get hired. So if we send 5 people, we're probably going to make a placement, right? The sanity is in the number. The other 4 are, I changed my mind on relocation. My job gave me a counter offer to stay. I decided I don't like that hiring manager. Fill in whatever the problem is. It's the same thing with a student, right? If you know what your daily activity is and you talk to X amount of folks, well, baked into those numbers will be, I decided to go work at my dad's company instead. I'm not going to go to school. I decided to do fill in the blank. I'm not enrolling because I like that school better. All of that insanity is baked into the numbers if you follow your daily activity. Now, as an admissions leader or recruitment leader, I'm going to look at our conversion numbers, and if somebody is falling off of those numbers, well, those are training opportunities, right? I go, hey, Kathy's having a hard time, after she gets to this stage, she's not converting to the next. She's low on that. What do I have to do? Maybe I got to jump on and listen to some of her calls. Maybe I got to accompany her on a campus tour. She's missing something there. She's all the efforts there, the activities there. We just got to get her over that hump. And, not as many clients over the years. I think I hear talk about that stuff. Plenty do. And there's plenty of great schools that do.
Yeah.
So many are just focused on, how many applications did you get? How many enrollments did you get from those applications? I mean, I've actually seen it in an offer letter, back in the day where it was like, you'll be expected to get this many applications per month. And I'm like, really? Well, how many leads are they going to get? And what's the average lead to application conversion? And again, I'm not an admissions guy. I'm throwing numbers out there because those just make sense in an activity-based effort. And they couldn't give those answers, obviously, right? So I'm sure when you're in schools and training and helping folks, you're seeing that stuff all the time.
Absolutely. I've actually seen that in job posts as far as you're expected to bring in X amount of students every single month. And imagine someone looking for a job and they're like, what are they even talking about? Because when people think of higher ed, they're not thinking about numbers when ultimately as a business, but that's not where their mind goes. And I love that you brought up daily expectations, because I think sometimes advisors are thinking so far ahead that they miss the meat of the entire process. I had an advisor tell me last week, I was doing a one-on-one session, and she said to me, honestly, I'm not connecting with anyone because all I'm hearing is my DOA telling me you need 4 more, you need 4 more. And she's like, when I pick up the phone, I'm just thinking about the 4 more. And I don't even understand what they're talking about. It's a problem. But I love the daily, one student at a time, one day at a time. And I find a lot of advisors, they don't even understand their conversions. Some aren't even coachable.
And again, all of the craziness. Listen, we're dealing with human beings, right?
Exactly.
So, in recruitment, I always joke around, like if you're in real estate, right, and you sell someone a house, well, after 5 days, the house doesn't go, I really don't like these new occupants who are living in here. And I want them out. I'm going to toss them out. Well, that happens in recruitment, right? The client can throw them out, or the candidate can go, this isn't the place for me. It's not what I thought it was. And they leave, right? So we're dealing with human emotions here. We're dealing with human beings. And boy, in education, we're obviously I'm dealing with people's careers. That's very serious, but we're dealing with people's education, and we're dealing with a lot of money invested, right? Big investment up front. So it has to be right. And there's a lot of variables. And I think the only way to do that is, be honest, be consultative in all your approaches, and then just track those daily numbers, and that will wash out the insanity, right? Just know, if I talk to whatever you're tracking, this many people I want to talk to live a day. Okay. Well, if I talk to that many people live a day, I never have a problem at the end of the month, because if I do it right, it just works itself out. That's, I think, what people should trend towards. That's what we do here.
Hello. Well, I always say the most important thing in admissions, the beautiful thing about admissions is like what you were talking about earlier. You could always work yourself backwards in the process, right? So you should never feel lost. Number one, there's always somebody to call. But because of those conversions, you'll be able to say, all right, maybe people aren't enrolling because I'm not getting to what their need is in the interview. People aren't showing up to the interview. I need to look at my call. I'm not getting enough leads. Now I need to look at marketing. There's something in admissions where you could always go one step back to understand where you're actually falling off. Personality.
Yeah.
When it comes to advisors, how do you feel about this personality? I see so many advisors, they're on the phone and they're just like computers. And I'm like, if I was talking to you, there's no way in heck I was coming in for that appointment.
Yeah. I mean, you see so many speakers, right? Like, I think like Gary V, and a lot of those people are big. And it's like, what does he hear? Be your authentic self, right? Or he'll say that doesn't resonate with who my authentic self is, or who I am. I think you have to let your personality shine through at some point. And if, and just accept that a lot of people won't like that personality, right? I'm sure I've spoken to thousands of people, a year over the 20 years. I'm sure there's plenty there who would be like, oh, that Vince, he was, the New York and me got the best of them. They didn't like me. And then others might have wonderful things to say. That's okay. It's all okay. I'll take the chances with my personality. So I think reps or counselors should, be themselves, have some fun with it. And if people now listen, if nobody's relating to your personality, you might need some personal adjustments, but be yourself. I liked having different team members, diverse team members, people from different parts of the country, because they just related to people differently than I would, right? And they maybe be effective where no matter how much training or experience I have, I wouldn't be, because I just didn't relate to them the same way they did. And that could be anything. You like music, it could be another musician, and they connect on that, and that just kind of weaves into that conversation, and they get a little bit more comfortable talking about their goals and career ambitions or education ambitions, right?
Absolutely. So you have the opportunity to meet with so many different types of personalities and backgrounds, because you meet with people nationwide also, right? What are some of the biggest challenges that you've experienced in recruiting? Because dealing with multiple personalities is not always the easiest thing.
Yeah. So, I think the first is, you get a couple of New Yorkers talking, and we move fast and we talk fast and we can go, right? And it's fun and it's energizing. I think talking around the country, you have to adjust to different parts of the country. I tend to slow down a little bit in the South, so you just have to watch where you're different cultures. Early in my career, we used to call all candidates are liars. Used to hear that in this I was in a big office before I went out off on my own. So it was like 35 people. I mean, that liar, this and that liar, that. All candidates were liars, right? These applicants, people were recruited. And I was one of those, right? I was full in on that until I started to realize they weren't lying. I wasn't asking the questions, right? I can't be mad at someone for not voluntarily telling me something. I need to not be afraid to ask them, who besides you is involved in a relocation? Well, mom lives with me and she's pretty ill these days. She's not okay. So moving from Missouri to Florida might not be the best move for her right now. Yeah, probably not. But, I want to look at a lot of opportunities and see everything out there. This person's probably not moving or, whatever the case might be. So I found that was the biggest challenge, and it still is today, because golf is a game that doesn't come naturally to too many people, almost none. It's a game of like mental discipline. And for me, I felt recruiting is where all of your natural instincts are usually wrong and you have to think past them. So you tend to want to go fast, right? So even though I've been doing this a long time, how do I really have to go step by step through all these questions again to make sure I understand where this person's coming from and where they want to go? Yeah, I do. And if I skip that, right, you get a little too full of yourself. I've been doing this for a long time. I know what I'm doing now. Get out the same sheet that you make your brand new people use and follow it step by step. And then that person will tell you something where the light bulb goes off and you go, oh yeah, that's not really right for them. Maybe they just don't know it yet. And you'll be like, hey, because of that, this might be tough. And they go, yeah, I never really thought of that. So they didn't lie. If you hooked them to a lie detector test, they're always telling you the truth. It's just they haven't thought through a lot of things. So that's the big, on the candidate side, that's the biggest challenge. And that's really on me. It's just to ask better questions and ask all of the questions. Be curious, probe deeper. Don't be afraid. If you offend them because you ask too many questions, oh well, right? But at least we know. On the client side, working with colleges and universities, it's usually just messy hiring processes, not organized. Great schools are not always great at hiring. They're great at having the best program. They got the great programmatic accreditation. Their student experience is wonderful. They have NCLEX scores through the roof. Take your pick, right? They do all the right things. They're so good at what they do, but they don't interview all the time, right? They don't hire. They graduate thousands of students or hundreds of students a year, but how many hires do they make in a year? So clients just tend not to be good at that. So trying to, gently kind of leave the trail of breadcrumbs for them to follow. Hey, this will work really well. Let's follow this process. Let's keep it smooth. That's pretty frustrating. Yeah. Especially they like the candidate and then they don't schedule the next interview for 2 weeks later. And 2 weeks later, that candidate goes, yeah, what interview am I in? What was I interviewing for?
How did you get my information?
Yeah.
That's so funny. So used to things, we forget to go back to basics, and we kind of stray away from what used to work. So
Yeah.
it's like remembering, okay, follow the same process that I'm teaching other people to follow. For me, the most challenging thing in higher education was trying to slow down. Like you said, being a New Yorker, I was doing outdoor sales before I came into higher ed.
Okay.
So I was walking door to door, seeing 100 plus doors, unannounced, no schedule, no appointment, selling office supplies.
Yeah.
So when I walked into that office, I had 30 seconds to impulse the decision maker and get past the gatekeeper. Now I come over to higher ed and I'm like, and they're like, whoa, what do
Slow
you
it down.
mean? So I mean, when it comes to New Yorkers, some people, they have to adjust. And like out of towners, I always say, when it comes to New Yorkers, when they ask you, how are you? That's just a figure of speech. It's so bad. But you have some people actually sitting there like, oh, well, I'm really doing, and the person is like halfway down the block, because it's just the same thing as saying hello.
Yeah.
But I love it. If you could do this all over again, would you take the same path?
Good question. Yeah, no, I would. I would have, when I started, like, hired twice as many people, like just right out of the gate. Like, hindsight being 2020, you're always going conservative and not wanting to overextend yourself. Yeah, I would have hired like 20 people and built out an office and borrowed money from everybody I knew to make that happen. Yeah. I think, obviously the career college sector is it's still very busy, but not as large as it used to be. And during that heyday, there was a lot of opportunity to help schools grow with a lot of talent. So, and we filled a lot of them, but I could probably fill twice as many. So that's about the only thing I would do different, and maybe get into it a little younger. Like I didn't need to wait till 28, like maybe 24 would have been good. And any younger, I'm not sure I would have been ready, but
So Vincent, tell everyone, what kind of schools do you work with, and how do they get in contact with you?
Yeah, great question. So obviously I cut my teeth in the career college sector. So that doesn't mean for-profit. It doesn't mean non-for-profit. It's really any, institute, technical school, college, university, from nationally accredited to regionally accredited, that has career focused programs, right? Mm-hmm. And I always call them, they're very entrepreneurial, right? They're not approaching students and the student experience. They do treat the student as a customer, right? They are their guests, right? And it's their job to give them all the tools necessary to get a great education and graduate, versus, when I went to school and it seemed like the financial aid office was always closed and I could never get in it.
Oh gosh.
So those are our clients. And like I said, those range from little technical schools, heavy equipment colleges that teach people how to drive a backhoe, to CDL and truck driving, to, regionally accredited institutions that are, offering how to become, get a master's in being a physician assistant. It really works the gamut, to all types of high-end nursing programs. That's one client base. We do some traditional kind of academia, not-for-profit, but it usually falls into that entrepreneurial set. So they're doing something in online, or they're doing something really tech savvy, and then they'll kind of want people from our sector, right? Versus traditional academia. We have a second division, which is about 4 years old now, that just recruits in the charter school market. So K through 12, no higher ed. That's been a new one for us. A lot of fun, a lot of principals, pretty much is predominant. But we're kind of like one of a few firms in the country that specialize in that. So I've had a lot of success there. So that's fun. Easiest way you can get me on LinkedIn. I'm always there. Our website's Ed-Exec, if you will, exec.com, or you can just dial my phone. I usually answer if I'm not on the call or talking to you. That's 860-781-7641.
Awesome. Love it. Any final thoughts for our listeners or executives out there who may be looking for the perfect candidate for enrollment management or admissions advisors?
Yeah. I just dealt with, I said I was doing a little vacation here, and the president of a pretty unique university up in Hartford is one of my neighbors. And he called me aside and said, "Hey, Vince, I might need you for the search." And I said, "Well, let me see your job ad. Like, let me see what you put together." And they don't have a lot of budget for it, so I'm not even sure they can afford a firm for this particular search. And I looked at the job ad, and it was it was a job description. And to me, job descriptions are the most boring thing out there because it's kind of usually what you do already.
Yeah.
Being restated. And it's, I want, I need. And many, many years ago, there was a magazine serving the career college sector. And I wrote an ad called Sexy Job Ads, which, maybe a little inappropriate for education. But the bottom line was we spend all of this time talking about what we need when we're hiring. But when we're enrolling students, what do we talk about? What we have to offer, what a great institution we are, what programmatic accreditation we have, what a culture we have here, what are all our community partnerships. Like we sell ourselves so well. And I tell folks, take all of that and put that at the top of your job ad. Spend the first half of that page talking about why people should want to work here, who were the most successful people, how did they get promoted, where did they go, and then the very bottom you could have the requirements. I mean, everybody knows the requirements.
Exactly.
Put those on the bottom. Stay compliant with your HR department, but talk about the same way you talk about what your institution has to offer when you talk to a prospective student. Talk about that when you're hiring, and continue those conversations throughout the interview process. From the first contact, 70% of it should be what a great place this is to work and how successful you'll be when you're here. And the other 40% should be what you will have to do. Now, towards the end, you do want to be transparent, like you said, right? Let them know what to expect, what every day looks like. But I think they should be selling their great schools a little bit more. And that's probably the biggest thing I don't see during an interview process, whether they come through us or they're hiring on their own, is they just don't brag enough and sell it enough to differentiate themselves. So the same way you differentiate yourselves in the marketplace when talking to students, do it when you hire, and you'll have a lot of success.
I love that. And it's so important because, there's so many toxic work environments and people are trying to get away from that. So imagine reading a job ad where it's like, how amazing the culture is, how amazing it is to work here. Here's how you're going to be successful. Training is going to be available. All of our employees, X, Y, and Z. It gets the person really excited to actually apply. And now all of the anxiety, most of it is out the window when it comes to the actual interview. I love that.
Yeah, it's fun.
And I'm going to look up that article, Sexy Job Ads, because I definitely want to read that.
Yeah, it's an older one. I'll send it to you. I should do a more 2024 version of it. Maybe we'll do job ads that sparkle or something. I don't know. We'll figure it out.
Well, Vince, it was an absolute delight to have you on the show. I really hope that the listeners were taking notes, especially the executives who have revolving doors in the admissions teams. You dropped a lot of gems, and I really think that if people hire you, to really scout out employees, it's going to put a stop to those revolving doors and they'll be able to grow. But thank you so much for visiting us. I have to have you back again, Vince.
Anytime.
So
it's been my pleasure.
All right. Thank you, listeners. Until next time. Bye.
All right. Well, take care.
I really hope that you enjoyed that episode. I have been working diligently to bring awareness to career schools. There's so much that they have to offer our students and our community. Every single role within the admissions process is critical, whether you're a part of the admissions team, financial aid, career services, academics, everyone deserves a voice. Admissions is the first point of contact for your school. So you want to ensure that you have a team who exudes confidence, passion, and a clear understanding of effective communication with our potential students. I totally understand the pain of missed class starts, low appointment and enrollment conversions, and this is why I created Next Level Admissions Training by Motivate with K.A.T. This platform is a step-by-step process, and it is going to train your new and tenured advisors in every single step of the enrollment process to ensure that our students are inspired and they're ready and prepared to start class. Admissions is not easy. It can be very challenging, but it's definitely worth it. So if you're ready to take your school to the next level, head on over to lessons.motivatewithkat.com and check out Next Level